Hi, my name is Nicholas Fife, and I'm a recent graduate of Full Sail University's Game Design Bachelor's Degree program. In my last video, I did a quick playthrough of the boss level that I designed for my team's Capstone project, and then I hopped over into the Unity editor and just did a quick run through of how I had everything set up. So, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to get into a little bit of the details on how I scripted everything and talk about some of the problem solving that I had to do in order to get everything working the way that I wanted it to. So, the first issue that I had to figure out how to solve was that I wanted multiple instances of this boss appearing at different points in the level, and I needed to be able to coordinate between them. And so that's why I ended up setting them up all as child objects of a single parent. And I do most of the coordinating on the parent object. I have the script set up here. It has a whole set of arrays. It has the public array where I assigned each of the pop-ups. And then all of these I'm going to go through and assign in start. And then I have the active self, which is the integer that I use to control which array slot I'm accessing at any given time. So on start, I call set popup, and set popup is just a for loop. And it runs through once for each object in the popup array and assigns all of the coordinating variables using that public array as a starting point. And then what's going to happen is it's going to start idling just so that it does not start off immediately rising and attacking the player. I wanted to put a little bit of a delay there so that the player has a chance to look around and orient themselves in the level before they start getting attacked. Start idling is also used in between attack routines after the boss has taken damage and lowered and is reactivating. But right now, all start idling really does is once the timer elapses, it calls pick anim, it randomizes active self, um, it checks to make sure that the player is not in melee range. Each of the instances of the boss have a trigger volume on them that turns the melee bool on and off. So if the random active self that's selected has melee set to true instead of false, it's going to start back at the top of the method and pick a different one. Otherwise, it will go ahead and set angry to true, and it will go ahead and start gears. The gears also use active self to determine which of the animations to play. That way, we make sure that if instance 0 of the boss rises, the correct two platforms also rise and also start rotating towards the boss. So what's going to happen when the angry bool gets set to true is the instance of the boss is going to be able to leave its idle state, which has it sitting just with the crown visible above the lava, and it will rise, it'll reach its transitional idle state, and then depending on player proximity, it's going to either go through its long attack cycle or its short attack cycle, um, and keep repeating until the player damages it. The long attack cycle goes through and just has a series of animation events, and it calls long fire as it goes through. The short range attack cycle is a short range attack that we'll call short fire, which is basically the same but slightly different. I'll explain in a minute. And then it will enter a vulnerable state that allows the player to damage it. And it'll just keep cycling through until the player is successful in damaging it. At which point it'll call flinch, it'll lower, it'll go to idle, and then it will allow the next instance of the boss to pop up and become active. Or, I guess the player could also jump into its mouth, at which point the chomp kill animation will play, and the boss will chew the player up, and they'll have to start over. So now I guess we will go ahead and hop over back into Visual Studio on the pop-up pass-through. Long fire and short fire, like I said, they're pretty similar. They both play a noise. They both create a variable and instantiate a new game object while assigning it to that variable. And then it is going to use that reference in order to call a method on move lava ball, which is the script that actually controls the lava balls. Long fire calls set target, meanwhile short fire will call random target. The next thing I'm going to do is go into a little bit of detail about how the actual lava ball behaves before I start breaking down how it works in script. So let me go ahead, hop back over to the Unity editor. We're going to play this, and I will show you what I'm talking about. See which one of them rises. All right, so this one ends up rising, and what you're going to see is the lava ball is going to appear over here. It's going to shoot up into the sky, and then you are going to see a white cube appear on the screen right about here and drop down on top of the player right there. So what's actually happening, because I want a steady delay between the moment a lava ball is created and the moment it impacts its target point, I'm not actually using physics or anything that hardly resembles physics in order to move these. I'm actually using a lerp and a fraction of the time that is elapsed in order to move them. And there is a temporary target, which I have visualized with a cube, that appears way up above the player, and the lava ball actually moves towards that cube, and the cube moves straight down towards the player in order to create a realistic lobbing effect. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like. So there's the lava ball, and you can see that cube. Let's see if I can get a better angle on where it's appearing here. You can kind of see it. Okay. But yeah, so like I said, the no matter where the player is moved, I can go ahead and grab him and move him closer. And we are going to have the same thing, or the same delay. And if I move him further away, it will still be the same unless they end up dying before All right, so now let's hop over into the script and I will show how it's done. All right, so when the lava ball is first instantiated, what it's going to do, it's going to come here on awake. It's going to set up all this stuff. If the boss has taken damage, I actually shorten the delay right here, just by checking the stats on it. And the pop-up pass-through is what actually gets the ball rolling. If it calls random target, it's going to set the target position to the player's position, and then it's going to randomize by about 3 units on the X and Z axis, and then call calc trajectory. If I call set target, which is what long fire does, I do not randomize anything. And then calc trajectory is going to kind of create the baselines for stuff. It's going to measure the distance between the lava ball and its target position. It is then going to use that distance and compare it to an assumed distance that I have set up. And it's going to use the distance ratio created from that comparison to adjust the actual height. So that if the player is very close, the lava ball is going to arc very high, and if the player is further away, the lava ball is going to not arc as high, and that helps smooth out the appearance of the lava balls so that if the player is really close, the lava ball doesn't have to look like it's moving at a crawl in order to actually still impact at the same time as when the player is further away. I then hop over here and set up the temporary target, which is what that cube um, is set up as, and I move the temporary target to whatever distance above the primary target. I go ahead, I set up my light blob projector, and then I do a couple final calculations, which is measuring the distance from the target to the temporary target and measuring the distance from the lava ball to the temporary target. I need those two baselines because of lerping between the positions. I need to create these baselines in order to allow it to actually work. So on fixed update, what we have happening, actually I'm going to cover update first. Update counts the timer and then creates the time ratio, which is used for calculating movement and a couple other things. One of the issues that I kept running into with an earlier version of this is that if the player was jumping at the moment the lava ball is created, its target position would actually be above the ground. And what could happen is the lava ball would move, it would go to the target just the way as intended, and then if it didn't impact anything, it would start doing this weird like black hole thing where it would shoot past and then bounce back. I guess less black hole and more rubber band. And it would just keep rubber banding past the target and then shooting back in a different direction. Um, so one of the things that the time ratio does is once we are at 95% complete with the arc, it's actually going to come down here instead, and I'm going to calculate the trajectory between it and its target position, and I am just going to launch that sucker straight at the target position and turn off the lerps that I used for the bulk of the time. And then just in case it manages to like shoot through the floor or something, um, without detecting anything and being destroyed, I go ahead and manually destroy it once that time ratio is at 1.25. But for the majority of the time, this little chunk of code right here is the behavior that's happening. Turn my pretty and fly my pretty. Turn my pretty is just used for keeping the visualization up to date. I used to have more things happening with it. The older version of the code where I was getting the rubber banding was in part because I was intentionally moving the object along its forward, and I was just pointing it at the target. And so I got rid of that, and I just left this here because it was easier, and we were right at the end of this project. And then Fly My Pretty is where most of the work actually ends up happening. We go ahead and we are going to lerp the lava ball between its origin position and the temporary target's current position according to the time ratio. And then we are going to move the temporary target between its starting position and its target position according to the time ratio. And then I scale the orthographic size of our light projector so that as time passes or as the lava ball gets closer, it's going to be bigger and more noticeable to give the player some good feedback of, hey, I should probably move. I think that pretty well covers the lava ball behavior. There's a couple other things I could go into detail with, but they're not particularly interesting. The only other big issue that I had to figure out how to solve while designing this fight was the idle system, because because of the rotation of the platforms and not wanting them to jump. The platform, the rotating gear animations, have a specific exit point where it is able to where it is able to exit its normal rotation and enter the rotation as it lowers back down under the lava. And one of the issues that I ran into was if the player crosses at just the right time, it takes a little bit before that platform will lower. And it gives the player the opportunity to get all the way through one of the boss's attack routines and damage it before the platforms have finished lowering. And what would happen is the boss would idle, and then the new one would rise, and it would start shooting at the player, and the player was still stuck on that platform waiting for the gears to finish lowering and the new set to rise so that they could get to the boss. So what I did was set up a sort of double prime idle, where what happens is the gears have animation events on the lower animations that say, hey, I'm done lowering. And the boss has a piece of code right here that calls prime idle after it receives damage. And we will jump to prime idle real quick right here. So all it is, it's super simple. The first time it gets called, primed idle is going to be false, so it won't do this. It's going to set it to true. And then the second time it gets called, whichever order it gets called in, it will actually start idling. It'll reset primed idle to false, set idling to true, and set the timer. And this is just going to go through and count down. And once it's done counting down, as long as it is not in the process of dying, it will pick a new anim and start the whole attack sequence and everything all over again. Okay, I think that pretty much covers everything I wanted to talk about with this script. I hope it was interesting. I hope it was relatively easy to follow along with. And thank you for taking the time to watch.